This is my true story. I spent my whole life working for my son, giving him everything I never had. I thought when I grew old, he would remember my sacrifices and share his life with me. But when he planned a trip to Italy, he never invited me. I overheard him laughing with friends, saying I was too old and would slow them down. That humiliation cut me deeper than anything else. But what he forgot was the ticket was in my name, and what I did next left him stranded. Before I tell you, comment where you're watching from and please subscribe so my story can reach more people. I worked for decades so that my son could have a life better than mine. I was born poor, with no chance of travel, no luxury, no safety net. My youth was spent in fields, factories, and on construction sites, where every coin earned came from sweat dripping down my back and pain shooting through my hands. When my son was born, I made a promise to myself. He would never live the life I had lived. I wanted him to have what I never did. So I took on extra shifts, I worked weekends, and I said no to my own needs so I could say yes to his. When he needed new shoes for school, I bought them even if it meant I wore the same pair for 10 years. When he wanted to join clubs and take part in sports, I paid for it even if it meant eating less. When he wanted to go to university, I paid for it proudly, even though it meant I worked nights while others my age were resting at home. He had trips abroad during his studies, and I covered them. I remember wiring him money so he could stay in good hotels, while I sat at home with leaking ceilings and second-hand clothes. I thought nothing of it, because in my heart, I believed one day he would look back and thank me. I believed he would remember those sacrifices and include me in his successes. When he traveled for the first time as a young man, I was proud to see the pictures. I thought, one day, when I am older, he will take me too. We will share those memories. That was my dream. Not riches, not comfort, but the chance to sit beside him on a plane, to walk with him through new streets, to feel like all my years of sacrifice were worth it. Even when he became successful, I continued to give. I helped pay for his house deposit. I covered costs he never even thanked me for. When he booked vacations with friends in the past, I gave him spending money, thinking one day he would say, "Dad, this time come with me." But that day never came. Still, I kept believing. I thought maybe Italy would be different. Maybe this trip, when he was older and I was nearing the end of my life, he would finally remember me. I imagined us sitting in a cafe in Rome, looking at the Colosseum, sharing stories. I imagined walking with him along the canals of Venice, telling him how proud I was. I imagined finally not being the man who only paid for trips, but the man who lived them too. That was my dream as a father, the simplest dream of all. To be included, to be wanted, to feel like my sacrifices had built something more than just distance. I thought Italy would be my chance. But that belief, like so many others, was about to be shattered. The signs that I was no longer part of his plans did not appear all at once. They came slowly, small cuts that I tried to ignore, hoping they meant nothing. The first time I noticed it was during his earlier trips. He would talk about vacations with his friends or co-workers, but never once did he mention including me. I would overhear him saying things like, "It's adults only," or "We need privacy." I brushed it off, telling myself maybe those trips weren't right for me. Maybe one day there would be another one meant for both of us. But deep down, the sting was there. I had sacrificed so much, and yet I wasn't even considered. I tried to comfort myself with the idea that he was young and wanted freedom. Still, the silence when it came to me was heavy. Every time he returned with stories of beaches, food, and laughter, I sat and smiled, but inside I felt the gap widening. He never once asked if I wanted to join. He never even hinted at it. When Italy came up, I had hope. I heard him planning it weeks before he told me. I caught pieces of conversations on the phone, words like Rome, Florence, Venice. My heart lifted each time, because Italy had always been my dream. I imagined he would come to me one evening, place his hand on my shoulder and say, "Dad, pack your bags, we're going together." I waited. I looked for signs. But again I heard him only with his friends, planning hotels, tours, meals. He never asked for my input, never asked if I wanted to go. I would enter the room and the conversation would fall quiet, like they were hiding something. I told myself I was imagining it. I convinced myself that maybe he was planning to surprise me. Fathers live on hope when love feels one-sided, and I clung to that hope desperately. But the cracks grew bigger. I noticed the tickets on the counter one day. There were names listed, but mine was not there. My heart dropped, but I told myself maybe it was a mistake, maybe my name was added later. I stayed quiet, pretending not to notice. At dinner, I hinted, "Italy must be beautiful this time of year." He smiled, but he said nothing about me going. It was as if my words had no place in his world. I still held on to hope. I still believed maybe he was waiting until the last minute. I convinced myself he wouldn't leave me out. Not after all I've done, he wouldn't. But then came the whispers. I heard him talking to one of his friends late at night. He laughed and said, "I didn't invite him. He's too old. He'll slow us down." Those words hit like a hammer. My body froze, my chest tightened, and I felt humiliation wash over me. To him, I wasn't a father anymore. I wasn't someone who had built his life. I was baggage, something to be left behind. The signs of exclusion had always been there, but that night I could no longer deny them. He had erased me completely, and Italy, the trip I had dreamed of, would not include me. I sat in silence, staring at the walls of my home, realizing I had been replaced not by another person, but by his desire to erase me from his life. That was the beginning of my heartbreak, but also the beginning of my resolve. The moment that broke me came not in whispers, not in hints, but in words spoken clear and cold. I had already seen the signs, already felt the silence, already known deep down that my son had no intention of including me on his trip to Italy. But still, some part of me held on to the hope that I was wrong, that maybe he would come to his senses, that maybe my sacrifices meant something. That hope died one evening when I overheard him talking to his friends. I was walking past the living room when I heard his laughter. He was bragging about the trip, about the flights, the hotels, the tours, and then he said it. "I didn't invite him. He's too old. He'll just slow us down." The room erupted in laughter. His friends laughed with him, and he laughed too, never knowing I was standing just a few feet away. The words cut deeper than any wound I had ever carried. I stopped in my tracks, frozen, my chest tightening with shame. Too old? Slow them down? After everything I had done for him? After decades of breaking my back so he could go to school, so he could travel, so he could stand in the world without fear? Now I was nothing more than a joke to him, a burden to mock in front of his friends. I stood there, silent, humiliated, feeling my dignity stripped away. It was not just the words. It was the tone, the laughter, the way he dismissed me like I was nothing. That moment was worse than all the years of labor, worse than the hunger I had endured, worse than the sleepless nights of sacrifice. Because this was not poverty breaking me. This was my own son breaking me. I turned quietly and walked back to my room. I closed the door and sat down, my hands trembling, my body shaking. I looked around at the photographs on the walls, the family vacations I had paid for, the birthdays I had worked double shifts to afford, the smiles on his face when he was young. I thought of the times I had carried him on my shoulders when he was tired, when I was already exhausted but still gave him my strength. And now he mocked me for being too old. My chest ached with grief. My eyes burned with tears I could not hold back. I pressed my fists into my knees and whispered to myself, "So this is what I am to him. Not a father, not even a man, just baggage." That night, I did not eat. I sat in silence, staring into the dark, listening to his laughter from the other room, each sound slicing into me like a knife. I felt humiliated, erased, betrayed by the very person I had built my life around. The final insult was not just that he excluded me, it was that he mocked me. He turned me into a joke, and in that moment, something inside me changed. The pain was real, but beneath it, Another feeling began to grow. A cold, steady resolve. If he could treat me as nothing, then I would show him that I was not nothing. If he could humiliate me in front of his friends, then I would humiliate him in front of the world. I would not raise my voice. I would not argue. I would not even tell him what I planned. But I would act. And when I did, he would learn the cost of forgetting the man who gave him everything. That night, after hearing my son say I was too old and that I would slow him down, I went back to my room and sat alone in the dark. I did not sleep. I stared at the walls and the floor, but what I really saw were the years of my life that had been poured into him. Every memory came back in waves, but instead of bringing pride, they brought pain. I saw myself younger, standing in the factory with sweat pouring down my face, taking on double shifts so I could afford his school trips. I remembered the letters from his college, the huge tuition bills that I paid without hesitation, working overtime and eating bread for dinner so he could eat properly. I remembered how I denied myself small pleasures, new shoes, better clothes, medical checkups, so that every coin could go to him. I thought about the family vacations when he was young, when I booked the hotels, paid for the flights, carried all the bags, and walked behind him proudly while he enjoyed everything. And now, the same son who once ran into my arms with love, who once called me his hero, looked at me as nothing more than an embarrassment, something to laugh at with his friends. That realization broke me. I pulled out old family photographs, the ones I had kept carefully in an album. I flipped through each one slowly, my hand shaking as I touched the images of happier times. There was one photo of him smiling in front of the Eiffel Tower when he studied abroad. I paid for that trip. Another of him standing in front of the Statue of Liberty when he went to America with his friends. I covered part of that too. I remembered how proud I felt receiving postcards from him, how I showed them to neighbors as if they were proof that my sacrifices mattered. Looking at those same photos now, all I could see was the reality, that I had funded a life that no longer had space for me. That humiliation cut so deep it was hard to breathe. I sat there in silence, tears streaming down my face, but inside, something began to shift. The sadness was still there, but it was no longer just sadness. It was changing into a cold kind of focus. My mind, even at my age, was sharp. I realized that while he saw me as disposable, I still had control over things he depended on. He thought I was powerless, but I wasn't. He thought he had left me behind, but in truth, his arrogance had blinded him to a detail he had forgotten. And as I sat there, staring at those photos, the humiliation slowly turned into resolve. I whispered to myself, "You left me out, you laughed at me, but you will learn that I am not so easy to erase." As I sat there in my room, staring at the photos and replaying his cruel words in my head, I realized something important. My son thought he was in control of everything. He thought he had all the power now because he earned more, because he traveled more, because he was younger and stronger. But what he didn't realize was that he had made one mistake, one oversight that would become his undoing. The plane ticket to Italy had been booked with my credit card, under my account. He had asked me for help in the beginning, saying the airline website was acting up, so I used my account to make the booking. I paid with my card, and though he promised to pay me back later, the ticket was in my name, tied to my account, under my control. At the time, I thought nothing of it. I was glad to help, happy to see him traveling again. But now, after he mocked me and erased me from his life, I saw it differently. That ticket was his pride, his joy, the thing he bragged about to his friends. But the truth was, it wasn't his, it was mine. The more I thought about it, the more I realized the irony. He called me too old. He told his friends I would slow them down. He laughed about leaving me behind. Yet the very trip he was boasting about existed because of me. Without my account, without my card, without my willingness to step in, he would have nothing. He believed he was untouchable. But the truth was, he was standing on a foundation I still controlled. He had forgotten that. He had forgotten the same way he had forgotten my sacrifices over the years, and that mistake would cost him. I leaned back in my chair and let the thought grow in my mind. What if I simply took back what was mine? What if, with one phone call, I removed the ground from under him? He assumed I was powerless, but power was right there, in my hands. One click, one change, one decision, and his Italy trip would disappear before his eyes. He had mocked me for being old, but maybe old age comes with something he lacked: patience, memory, and control. He had forgotten the details. I hadn't. As the night wore on, I thought about it more. My humiliation had left me broken hours earlier, but now I felt sharper than I had in years. I realized that sometimes revenge didn't require shouting or fighting. Sometimes it required silence and precision. He thought he could erase me, but he had forgotten the truth. I was still there, holding the strings, waiting for the right moment. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. My son had called me useless, mocked me as old, erased me from his trip. But now I saw the path clearly. If he thought I was powerless, then it was time to remind him that I was not only his father, but the man who still held the keys to parts of his life. The ticket to Italy was mine to control, and I was going to use that fact to deliver a lesson he would never forget. I sat at my table and poured myself a cup of tea, steadying my hands. I was not angry anymore. Anger burns hot and fades quickly. No, what I felt now was cold and steady. Revenge is best when served cold, and that is exactly how I would serve it. I took out the folder where I had stored the flight confirmation. There it was, my account name, my card, my control. I called the airline early, speaking calmly to the agent. I explained that I was the account holder, that I had made the booking, and that I wanted to cancel one of the tickets. She asked for my details, and I gave them without hesitation. Within minutes, I heard the words that sealed everything. "Yes, sir. The cancellation has been processed. You will receive credit and cash back shortly." I closed my eyes and let the relief wash over me. It was done. My son's precious Italy trip had been cut at the root, and he didn't even know it yet. But I wasn't reckless. I kept everything quiet. I didn't tell him. I didn't hint at it. I wanted him to walk into that airport full of arrogance, full of confidence, full of pride that he was leaving me behind. I wanted him to smile with his friends, hand over his passport at the desk, and then watch his world crumble when the agent told him his ticket was void. That moment would be my justice. That moment would be his lesson. For the next few days, I went about life as if nothing had changed. He still walked past me, barely saying a word, busy with his suitcase and his phone. He laughed with his friends, spoke of the trip, boasted about the sights they would see. And I sat quietly, nodding, hiding my small smile because I knew something he didn't. The plan was simple, clean, and perfect. No yelling, no confrontation, just one silent move that would leave him stranded where it hurt most, in front of the world he wanted to impress. He thought I was too old to matter, but soon he would learn that even an old man can change everything with a single decision. The day of the trip arrived. My son woke early, full of excitement. He strutted through the house, dragging his suitcase with confidence, checking his phone constantly, laughing at messages from his friends who were already on their way. He didn't look at me, didn't even say goodbye. To him, I didn't exist anymore. I sat quietly by the window, sipping my tea, watching him leave the house. He walked like a man who believed he had everything under control. But what he didn't know was that control had already slipped through his fingers days ago, the moment I made that phone call to the airline. I followed him quietly, keeping my distance. I wanted to see the moment. I wanted to watch his arrogance break. He entered the airport with his friends, smiling, full of energy, showing off his passport and talking loudly about the adventures waiting in Rome. I stood far back, blending into the crowd, watching carefully as he approached the airline desk. He handed over his passport and booking details with a grin, expecting everything to go smoothly. But then I saw it. The shift. The agent frowned, typed quickly on the keyboard, then frowned again. My son leaned in, confused, his smile beginning to fade. She spoke quietly, but I could imagine the words. "I'm sorry, sir, but your ticket has been voided." I watched as his posture changed. His shoulders stiffened, his face went pale, his mouth opened slightly in disbelief. He argued, he waved his hands, he demanded answers. The agent remained calm, showing him the screen, explaining that the booking had been canceled by the account holder. His friends stepped closer, whispering, their eyes wide with confusion. The scene began to draw attention. Travelers in line turned to look, and my son's humiliation grew with every passing second. He slammed his hand on the counter, his voice rising, but it didn't matter. The truth was the truth. His Italy trip was over before it began. From where I stood, I could see the panic in his eyes. He pulled out his phone, dialing furiously, calling me again and again. I let it ring in my pocket, my face calm, my heart steady. I had imagined this moment so many times, and now it was here. The boy who had mocked me for being too old, who had erased me from his plans, who had laughed about leaving me behind, was now the one left behind, and everyone could see it. His friends tried to comfort him, but I could tell from their faces that they were embarrassed too. Their big Italy trip was broken, their leader exposed. The laughter they once shared at my expense was now turned back on him. I watched for a while longer, long enough to see his arrogance collapse into desperation. Then, satisfied, I turned and walked away. I didn't need to see more. I had seen enough. The airport scene had given me exactly what I wanted. Proof that even the old man he dismissed still had power. Proof that respect cannot be mocked without consequence. When I returned home from the airport, my phone was already buzzing nonstop. My son had called me more than 10 times, and messages kept pouring in one after another. At first, I ignored them, letting the phone ring, letting the panic build inside him. I knew exactly what he was going through. At that airport desk, with the world watching, he had been forced to face the truth, that his ticket was gone, his trip destroyed, and his plans erased. Eventually, I answered one of his calls. His voice came through loud and frantic. "Dad, what happened? They said the ticket was canceled. My trip is ruined. Did you do this?" I sat calmly in my chair, my hands steady, my voice quiet but sharp. "You didn't invite me," I said slowly. "Now you can travel nowhere." There was silence on the line, followed by him shouting, begging, demanding an explanation. But I didn't give him one. I hung up. For once, he was the one left stranded, the one left without answers, the one humiliated. The fallout from that moment spread quickly. His friends, who had been so eager to travel with him, were furious. Some went on without him, others canceled out of frustration, but either way, his pride was crushed. They mocked him behind his back, saying he couldn't even manage his own trip. They whispered that he wasn't as independent or as strong as he claimed, that his own father had left him powerless. Word spread through the family too. Relatives heard the story, and while some pitied him, most shook their heads and said he deserved it. They remembered how he had bragged, how he had excluded me, how he had laughed at me. Now, the tables had turned, and everyone saw the irony. My son came home days later, dragging his suitcase, his head low, his arrogance gone. He didn't storm into the house like before. He didn't strut with pride. He barely looked me in the eye. I sat at the table, sipping tea, watching him quietly. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He just stood there, humiliated, beaten by his own mistake. I didn't say anything either. Silence was enough. He knew what I had done, and he knew why. The weight of that knowledge pressed on him harder than any lecture could. From then on, the fallout continued in his daily life. Friends distanced themselves. He avoided conversations about travel. His confidence was broken, and every time he looked at me, he was reminded that the man he called too old was the same man who had stranded him at the airport. He could no longer laugh at me, no longer dismiss me, because the truth stood between us. I was not baggage. I was the one who carried the power to end his pride in a single move. After the airport humiliation, the story spread quickly. His friends were the first to talk. They couldn't believe what had happened, and some of them laughed about it behind his back. They said things like, He bragged about Italy for weeks, and then his own father canceled his ticket. He tried to hide the truth, telling some that it was a mistake by the airline, but the people closest to him knew better. They had seen his face at the counter, pale and panicked. They had heard the agent's words. They had watched his trip collapse. The lie didn't hold, and soon everyone knew. He became the joke of his group, the man who thought he was untouchable but was left stranded like a child. When he came home, he avoided me for days. He stayed in his room, quiet, not laughing on the phone, not strutting around with confidence. The arrogance was gone. He barely made eye contact with me, and when he did, his eyes were filled with shame. I didn't scold him. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. The silence between us was enough. He knew what he had done to me when he left me out, when he mocked me as too old. And now he knew what I had done to him in return. The balance had been restored. Relatives soon began to call, some pretending to be sympathetic toward him, but most quietly supporting me. They said things like, he needed to learn a lesson, and maybe now he'll respect his father. Neighbors gave me nods when they passed by, small signs of understanding that I wasn't weak, that I wasn't the old man he thought I was. The humiliation he tried to put on me had flipped back onto him, and it stuck harder than he ever imagined. For me, life carried on calmly. I didn't boast, I didn't celebrate, but I felt a peace I hadn't felt in years. For once, I wasn't the one left behind. I wasn't the one mocked. I wasn't the one erased. He was. And I knew the memory of that day at the airport would follow him forever. Each time he thought of traveling, each time he packed a bag, each time he bragged about plans, he would remember the moment his arrogance was shattered. That was the aftermath. And that was enough. When the dust of his humiliation finally settled, I felt no guilt and no regret. I had not raised my hand against him. I had not screamed. I had not cursed. I had only taken back what was already mine, and in doing so, I reminded him that fathers are not toys to be thrown aside when convenient. Justice, for me, was not about ruining his life completely. It was about balance. He tried to erase me, and I erased his trip. He mocked me as old and useless, and I showed him I was sharp enough to cut his pride in half with one decision. That was my justice, and I carried it quietly. With the refunded money from his ticket, I booked myself a smaller trip, not to Italy, but to a quiet coastal town where I could rest. I packed lightly, took the bus, and when I arrived, I sat by the sea, sipping coffee, watching the waves roll in. I had no fancy hotels, no luxury, but I had peace, and that peace was worth more than any trip abroad. For once, I was traveling on my own terms, not as the man who sacrificed everything for someone else, but as a man who chose for himself. I looked at the horizon and smiled, knowing that I had finally taken something back. Back home, my son carried the weight of his shame. Every time he looked at me, he saw the man who had left him stranded at the airport, the man who had turned his laughter into humiliation. He spoke less, boasted less, and for the first time in years, I saw a glimmer of respect in his eyes. He did not apologize outright, but his silence was apology enough. He knew he had crossed a line, he knew he had underestimated me, and he knew that the father he thought was powerless was still capable of teaching lessons. In the end, my justice was simple. He thought I would slow him down, so I stopped him completely. He thought he could erase me, so I erased his plans. He thought old age made me weak, but I showed him that memory, patience, and quiet resolve are stronger than arrogance. I live now with peace in my heart, not because I hurt him, but because I reminded him who I am. A father. A man who gave everything. And a man who, when pushed too far, will always find a way to stand tall. That is my justice.